standing by the hospital bed, I watched as my wife, Kristen, cradled the newborn in her arms. Her face glowed with exhaustion and joy, her smile wide as she gazed down at the tiny bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket. My mother, Linda, and my mother-in-law, Dolores, stood on either side of her, their faces filled with pride and happiness. I had not moved closer. I had not reached out to hold the child. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, her silent observation sharp despite the joy of the moment. But she said nothing. Not yet. The door opened, and a nurse stepped in, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Davis, I need you to fill out the birth certificate form." I turned to face her, my expression calm but firm. "We can fill it out after the DNA test proves if I'm the father." Kristen's head snapped up so fast that the baby stirred against her chest. Her eyes widened, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Dolores let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest, while my mother stiffened beside her, her gaze flickering between me and Kristen. Kristen's face twisted with anger. "How dare you, Martin?" she hissed, her voice rising. "Are you accusing me of cheating?" I met her furious stare, unflinching. "No," I said, my voice cold and deliberate. "I am sure that you cheated. And now, I'm making sure if this child is actually mine or not." Dolores stepped forward, her expression tense, her voice low but urgent. "Martin, this is not the right time for this," she said, her hands slightly raised as if trying to calm me down. "Your wife just gave birth, and your words," she hesitated, glancing at Kristen, who was already breathing heavily, her face pale. "Your words can push her into postpartum depression. Think about the baby." My mother, Linda, was not as measured. She let out a sharp, furious breath before pointing a trembling finger at me. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she shouted. "Accusing your wife of cheating at a time like this? It's careless and horrible. I did not raise you to be this cruel, Martin." I stood there, silent, my gaze locked on Kristen. Her breathing was uneven now, her arms tightening around the baby as if she could use the infant as a shield. Her wide, tear-filled eyes darted between me and the two women defending her. I let their words settle in the air for a moment before slowly raising my hand, silencing them. My voice was steady, devoid of any rage or hesitation. "Kristen," I said, my eyes never leaving hers, "should I call your lover Marshall Jones?" Her entire body jerked, as if I had struck her. "What?" she gasped, horror flashing across her face. "No, I have nothing to do with him." I nodded slightly, then reached into my pocket. "Then why?" I said, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. "Did you message him about this?" I unfolded the paper with deliberate slowness, smoothing it out before reading aloud. "My husband should never know about you and me. I don't want anything to do with you." The color drained from her face. The room was silent except for the beeping of the monitor. Then, suddenly, she let out a choked sob. How did you get this?" she stammered. I let the paper hang loosely between my fingers and met her tear-filled eyes. "He gave it to me," I said simply. "He sent me this screenshot." Kristen's entire body trembled now, her breath ragged, her lips quivering. She clutched the baby tighter, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Then, almost in a whisper, broken and filled with disbelief, she muttered, "He said no one will ever know." Kristen's body trembled as she clutched the baby, her sobs shaking her entire frame. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her lips parted in shock, but I didn't let her settle, didn't give her room to compose herself. "So, you did sleep with him," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the tense air like a blade. "You got pregnant with his baby." She let out a strangled whimper, shaking her head frantically, but before she could speak, my mother, Linda, stepped in, her voice sharp yet pleading. "Martin, stop. It's not even proven that the child isn't yours." Dolores, still visibly shaken, quickly chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Yes. What if the baby is yours? You can't just assume the worst." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of months of quiet suffering pressing down on me. My hands clenched into fists before I forced myself to relax, keeping my voice calm and measured. "I knew about her cheating for the last 4 months," I stated plainly, watching as Kristen flinched. "I waited for the baby to be born just for the DNA test." Kristen gasped, her tear-filled eyes widening. You knew?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I ignored her, turning my gaze toward my mother and Dolores. "I wanted her to have a good, smooth pregnancy," I continued. "I didn't want her to go through stress or depression. But now that the baby is here, it's time for the truth." I inhaled deeply before finishing. "If the baby is mine, I will be his father. If not, then I will not take part in his life." Dolores let out a soft cry, but I didn't stop. "As for this woman," I said, tilting my head toward Kristen, who was now sobbing silently, "I am done. She will no longer be my wife. I will make sure of that." A thick silence hung in the air. My mother wiped a hand over her face, looking weary, as if she were grasping for words that would change my mind. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now, almost imploring. "Martin, the baby is innocent," she said. "He needs a father. A single mother cannot raise a child alone." She hesitated before continuing, her eyes filled with desperate hope. "You should think about reconciliation. Go to a marriage counselor." I turned to my mother, my voice heavy with restrained anger. "And do what?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Find out why my wife cheated? Sit in a room and listen to a feminist therapist explain how I was incapable of satisfying my wife's needs? Why my wife became another man's side piece? Then what? Listen to someone explain to me that my wife who got a baby from another man was right and justified in her actions, and now I just suck up and pick up the pieces and accept my bitch of a wife as she is, and just pretend that I now love her again, and how her cheating has reignited our love for each other and our relation is better than ever. You want me to be a willing cuck? You know what that means, right, Mom? Your son, a willing cuck, raising another man's child. Is that what you want me to be, Mom?" My mother's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. I took a step closer, my voice lowering, filled with bitter disbelief. "You want me to suffer more?" I shook my head, a humorless chuckle escaping my lips. "Are you really my mother, or did you pick me out of a garbage bag?" The room fell into complete silence. My mother's face paled, her mouth shutting tight. She didn't argue. She knew I was right. I turned my gaze to Dolores, who was holding onto Kristen's arm as if to keep her from completely breaking apart. "After she's discharged," I said, my tone now cold and final, "please take her with you. I've already packed her clothes and belongings. They will be delivered to your house, or wherever you want them." I gestured vaguely before adding, "But she is not entering my house." Kristen let out a soft sob, her face buried in her hands, but I refused to look at her. She didn't deserve my sympathy. I turned back to my mother, who still hadn't spoken. "You can do whatever you want," I told her. "I won't force any decision on you. I know you and Dolores are childhood friends, and I don't want my bitch wife's actions to ruin your friendship." My voice hardened. "I am not forcing anything on you, so don't force anything on me." I let the silence settle for a moment before repeating myself, my words slow and deliberate. "As I said before, if the child is mine, I will be his father. If not, then you will never try to force me into a relationship that reminds me of my wife's cheating." With that, I turned and walked out of the room. As I reached the door, I caught a glimpse of the nurse who had been standing there the entire time, silently witnessing the chaos unfold. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw it, a sympathetic look. That evening, as I sat in my now emptier house, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I sighed, already knowing what this call was about. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Her voice was soft but firm. "Son, I do not condone what Kristen has done," she began, "but at this moment, she needs both me and Dolores. I am at her place, and I will be here, helping them both." I clenched my jaw, rubbing my temple. Of course, she would be there. I had expected it, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "I have treated her like a daughter ever since she was born," my mother continued. "I just can't switch that off." She paused, as if debating her next words, then sighed. "Now, I do not know if the child is yours, but I would pray to God that he is. I would pray that you two could find a way to save this marriage." That was it. That was my limit. My grip tightened around the phone as I cut her off. "Mom, the marriage is over," I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for debate. "Even if the child is mine, I am done with her. Now stop pushing for that." "Martin," I didn't let her finish. "If you want to keep pushing for it, then consider your son dead. Do I make myself clear?" Silence. Then a quiet, resigned sigh. "I hear you," she murmured. I ended the call without another word. 2 days later, I made sure my actions spoke louder than any words ever could. My lawyer served Kristen with the divorce papers. Whatever illusions she had about fixing things were shattered in that moment. I had already canceled all her credit cards. The joint account was drained. I took my share and left hers. The investments were frozen until the divorce and the asset distribution. That afternoon, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen, my mother. I exhaled sharply, already bracing myself for another lecture. The moment I answered, she didn't waste time. Her voice was filled with disappointment, almost shaking. "You should not have done that," she said. "She is still not fully recovered, and you have put her through this. I am ashamed of you, Martin. I could never have imagined you being so heartless." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against the bridge of my nose. My patience was running razor thin. "Heartless?" I repeated, my voice low but filled with restrained fury. Where was her heart when she was opening her legs for that man? Was she thinking with her heart then? Silence. I pushed forward, my voice growing sharper with every word. Was she thinking about her marriage? Was she thinking about her husband when she decided to betray me? I let the questions hang in the air, giving her a moment to absorb them. You know the answer, Mom. So stop blaming me for her actions. I am just responding in kind. Still, she said nothing. I could hear her breathing on the other end, but she had no argument. Stop blaming me. I continued, my tone now cold and final, before I start holding you accountable for your actions now. With that, I ended the call, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat of my car. 3 days later, the DNA results arrived. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope, though I already knew what I would find inside. Not the father. I exhaled slowly, staring at the paper for a long moment, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was no relief, only finality. Any lingering doubts, any small part of me that had wondered if I was being too harsh, vanished in an instant. I folded the paper neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and grabbed my keys. Then, I drove to Dolores's house. I reached Dolores's house in about 30 minutes. As I stepped out of the car, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This moment would change everything, not just for me but for everyone involved. I knocked on the door, and within seconds, it swung open. Kristen stood there, her face lighting up with relief, hope, and something else, self-assured confidence. You've come to me, she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. I knew you loved me enough to reconsider. She gave a small, almost victorious smile. I was just telling Mom that you would come back to me. I know you can't live without me. She stepped forward, arms outstretched, as if she expected me to pull her into an embrace. I held out a hand, stopping her mid-step. Stop this drama, I said, my tone firm and unwavering. Where's your mother? I'm here to meet her. Go call her. The hopeful glow in her eyes flickered, then dimmed entirely. Her smile faltered, and she took a hesitant step back. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. Oh, she mumbled. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. I walked in, my footsteps echoing slightly in the quiet house. A moment later, Dolores appeared from the hallway. But she wasn't alone. My mother walked out beside her, cradling the baby in her arms. My mother's eyes lit up when she saw me, her face full of desperate hope. She walked toward me, gently bouncing the baby. Look, she said, smiling. The baby has your eyes. He looks just like you. She took another step forward. Come on, hold him once, and I can assure you, you'll forget everything. You'll be a happy family again. I took a step back. Mom, stop it, I said, my voice firm, my patience worn thin. Don't push it. She froze, looking at me with confusion and sadness. I told you to stop trying to force things, I continued, my voice now ice cold. Then, without another word, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the envelope, and handed it to Dolores. Please read it aloud, I said, making sure my voice was steady, so everyone in the room can hear it. Dolores took the paper from my hand with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the words, her lips parting slightly as she read aloud, her voice hollow. Sample A. Chances of paternity 0%. You are not his father. She exhaled sharply, as if the truth had physically struck her, then lowered herself onto a chair, pressing a hand to her forehead. Silence filled the room like a thick fog, suffocating, inescapable. My mother, still cradling the baby, reached for the paper next. She stared at it for a long moment, her lips moving soundlessly as she read the words to herself. Then, almost in slow motion, she too sank into a chair. Oh no, she whispered, her voice breaking. I let the silence linger for a few seconds, allowing the weight of the truth to settle over them. Then, I spoke, my tone cold, devoid of any remaining patience. I came here just to tell you both to stop pushing me for this child. Now you have proof. My gaze swept over them, my mother still holding the baby, Dolores still clutching her head in disbelief. As I said earlier, since this baby is not mine, I will not be a part of his life. I turned to my mother, leveling her with a look that carried all the exhaustion and bitterness I felt. I hope you're satisfied now, I said, my voice edged with finality. Even if you're not, I don't care anymore. This child is not your grandson. Your so-called beloved daughter took that away from you. I gestured toward Kristen, who stood frozen, tears streaking her face. Never, ever, try to push me to be a father to this child. I turned, my feet already moving toward the door. I was done here. But just as my hand reached for the doorknob, my mother's voice cut through the silence. Martin, stop. I halted but didn't turn around. I heard her rise from the chair, her footsteps slow but deliberate. Then, her voice, quieter now, filled the space between us. Drop me home. I turned just in time to see her handing the baby back to Kristen, whose face crumpled as she clutched the child to her chest. My mother then turned to Dolores, the weight of her decision clear in her posture. I'm sorry, she said, her voice filled with regret. I was hoping against all hope that this child was my grandson, but she shattered all my hopes. She paused, glancing between Dolores and Kristen. You are my best friend and will always be my best friend. I understand that right now, you need to be with your daughter, but I too need to be with my son. Dolores stood, walking slowly toward my mother. There was no anger, no resentment in her face, just understanding. She opened her arms, and my mother stepped into the embrace. Semper Fi, Dolores whispered. My mother responded, always faithful, sister. My mother walked out ahead of me, her posture stiff yet determined. She didn't look back as she stepped into the car, settling into the passenger seat without a word. I followed, shutting the door behind me before starting the engine. The drive was silent. I could feel her shifting slightly in her seat, glancing at me every few moments. But she didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. When we reached her house, she got out first and walked inside, leaving the door open for me. I hesitated for a second before following. As I stepped in, the familiar scent of home wrapped around me. Coffee, old books, and the faintest trace of lavender from the candles she always kept in the living room. Without a word, she moved to the kitchen. I heard the sound of cupboards opening and closing, the quiet clinking of a spoon against a mug. A few minutes later, she returned, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. She had added chocolate, just the way I liked it. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, staring at the dark liquid inside, my throat tightening. She sat down beside me, letting out a small sigh. Then, after a moment, she spoke. I'm sorry, son. Her voice was soft, full of regret. I glanced at her, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring down at her own hands, fingers lightly tracing the lines on her palm. I made a mistake, she continued. I was being selfish. I never wanted to see you and Kristen separate, but I was wrong. Forgive me. I took a deep breath, setting the mug down. I knew this wasn't easy for her to say. I know that you and Dolores are childhood friends, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I knew why you were supporting Kristen, but it was too much for me, Mom. I had no one beside me. No one supported me. And then, without warning, the weight of everything finally crushed me. My chest tightened, and my vision blurred. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as the dam I had built over the past few months shattered. I broke down. Tears spilled onto my hands, my shoulders shaking. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then I felt her hand, warm and steady, take mine. She shifted closer, brushing my hair back the way she used to when I was a kid, her touch comforting, familiar. You did good, she whispered. You were strong. You stood by what you believed in. You didn't budge, not even once. Even when I was supporting Kristen, you didn't break. She squeezed my hand, her voice filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time. I am proud of you, son. My mother's words still lingered in my mind. Her apology, her pride in me, the way she had finally chosen to stand by my side. But something else had caught my attention, something unexpected. Semper Fi, I said, looking at her. You said that when you hugged Dolores. What was that about? She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and shook her head slightly as if brushing off an old memory. Oh, that was nothing, she said, her voice light with nostalgia. We were in the Marines. We both served in the first Gulf War. We were among the 40,000 women in that war. Then we came back and retired. Then I had you. I blinked, taken aback. You never talk about that, I said, searching her face. She chuckled softly, shrugging. We were in logistics support, nothing exciting. But there was something in her tone, something in the way her eyes held on to an unseen past, that made me wonder if there was more to the story. Her gaze drifted to the framed photograph of my father on the shelf, and a softness settled over her features. Your father was an amazing man, she murmured. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She caught it quickly, brushing it away as if refusing to let it linger. Then, as if snapping herself out of it, she straightened up, squared her shoulders, and stood. Let me make you some food, she said, her voice returning to its usual warmth. I nodded, appreciating the gesture. She busied herself in the kitchen, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension between us. We sat together, eating in quiet companionship, letting the silence say the things we didn't need to. After dinner, I stood, stretching slightly. Thanks, Mom, I said. She reached out, giving my hand a firm squeeze before letting go. Anytime, son. With that, I left for home. The divorce dragged on longer than I had expected. Kristen decided to fight the divorce. I had filed it under adultery. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a pinched expression, seemed to scrutinize me more than Kristen. It was clear from the start that she wasn't particularly fond of my stance. Mr. Campbell, she said, her voice laced with disapproval, it appears that you are trying to run away from your responsibilities. A marriage is a commitment, and a child, regardless of the circumstances of conception, deserves stability. I kept my face impassive, but inside, my blood boiled. Responsibility? Stability? Where was that concern when my wife was sneaking around behind my back? Luckily, my lawyer, Ron Jeremy, was more than prepared. He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor," Ron said, flipping through the file in front of him, "with all due respect, my client is not abandoning his responsibilities. He is merely refusing to take on responsibilities that do not belong to him. This child is not his. We have the DNA test to prove it. And as for the marriage, my client was not the one who broke the vows. Mrs. Campbell was involved in an affair with a co-worker, Marshall Jones, and we have sufficient evidence to establish that this was not an isolated mistake, but a sustained betrayal." Kristen shifted in her seat, but kept her expression carefully composed. When it was her turn to testify, she put on the performance of a lifetime. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "I was lonely. Martin was always away for work, gone for weeks at a time. I felt like a single woman, like I didn't have a husband at all. Marshall was there. He listened to me. He understood what I was going through. I know I made a mistake, but I wasn't trying to hurt Martin." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to scoff. The way she spun it, she was the victim in all of this. "Did you continue seeing Mr. Jones after you discovered you were pregnant?" Ron asked, his tone neutral. Kristen shook her head quickly. "No. Once I knew I was pregnant, I cut off all communication with him. I wanted to make my marriage work." I glanced at Ron, who remained unfazed. "We had the evidence, messages, emails, phone records. We knew she was lying." "So, you had no further contact with him?" Ron pressed. "No," Kristen repeated, her voice firm. Ron sighed, then pulled out a stack of printed documents and held them up. "Your Honor, Exhibit C, messages exchanged between Mrs. Campbell and Mr. Jones over the course of her pregnancy. As you can see, not only did she remain in contact with him, but she also confided in him about her feelings, her plans, and even expressed doubts about telling my client the truth." Kristen's face paled slightly. "That doesn't mean I slept with him again," she blurted out. "Perhaps not," Ron conceded. "But it does prove that you maintained an emotional relationship with him despite being married. You claim to have cut ties, but the evidence shows otherwise." Kristen's lips pressed together, and she glanced at the judge, who studied the documents with a thoughtful frown. But then, Kristen shifted her approach. "I was alone," she said, her voice softening again. "I felt neglected. I didn't go looking for this, Your Honor. Marshall pursued me. He seduced me. I gave in because I was weak, because I was hurting. What was I supposed to do when my own husband wasn't there for me?" The judge's expression changed slightly. She nodded her head, as if absorbing Kristen's words, as if trying to agree with her. Ron turned to Kristen. There was an edge to his voice that made it clear he was about to dismantle her argument piece by piece. "Mrs. Campbell," he began, his tone smooth yet firm, "I heard what you said. Your husband was away, and you were needy." He dragged out the last word just slightly, letting the implication sink in. Kristen shifted in her seat uncomfortably. "Let's clarify something," he continued. "You claim that Martin was neglecting you. Is that correct?" Kristen hesitated, her lips pressing together before she responded. "Yes," she admitted. Ron nodded as if he expected that answer. "Did you ever tell your husband that his job was putting a strain on your marriage? Did you ever sit him down and say, 'Martin, this isn't working, I need more from you'?" She didn't say anything. I could see the gears turning in her head, searching for an answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. But there was nothing she could say that wouldn't unravel the web of excuses she had built. "Mrs. Campbell," Ron continued, not letting up, "you've painted a picture here. Your husband was away, and you were left alone. Meanwhile, Mr. Jones was there, listening to you, comforting you, complimenting you, being so incredibly caring." His words dripped with sarcasm. "But tell me something. Was your husband not caring?" Kristen remained silent. "Has your husband never complimented you?" Ron pressed. Still nothing. He turned to the judge and lifted a few printed pages. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct your attention to Mr. Campbell's social media accounts. Here, we see multiple instances where he took his wife out for dinners, shared heartfelt posts about her, and even surprised her with gifts. These don't look like the actions of a neglectful husband to me." He glanced back at Kristen. "So let me ask you a very straightforward question, Mrs. Campbell. Your infidelity, was it your husband's fault? Yes or no?" Kristen clenched her jaw. She looked at the judge, then at Ron, then at me. Finally, in a small voice, she muttered, "No." Ron let the word hang in the air for a moment before he took a step forward, his voice turning sharper. "You know, Mrs. Campbell," he said, "I've been listening to you for the past 2 hours. Not once have you taken accountability for your actions. Not once have you admitted fault. Not once you said that you were sorry. Instead, you've blamed your husband for everything that went wrong in your life. But here's what I don't understand. If Martin is such a failure in your eyes, if he was so terrible as a husband, Why are you pushing for reconciliation? Why are you trying to force a man you deceived to be a father to a child that he had no part in creating, a child that you had with Mr. Jones? Ron adjusted his tie and stepped forward, addressing the judge with the confidence of a man who knew he was about to make an irrefutable point. Your Honor, let's take a good look at Mr. Campbell here, he began, motioning toward me. According to his wife, he is neglectful, a pathetic husband who doesn't care about his wife's feelings. She claims he's running away from his responsibilities as a father. In short, she wants us to believe he's a loser. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the words. Kristen sat rigidly, arms crossed, her eyes flickering between the judge and Ron. Now, Your Honor, Ron continued, should a woman continue to live with such a man? Should she stay married to someone she considers such a failure? Or should she instead be with Mr. Jones, the man she claims is caring, considerate, and, according to her, the actual father of this child? Kristen's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratching of a stenographer's pen. I'd like to remind the court that we have not yet established, through a DNA test, that Mr. Jones is in fact the father of this child. We are simply going off of Mrs. Campbell's word. Ron let that statement settle, allowing the implications to sink in. And given that Mrs. Campbell once told my client that this child was his, something that was proven to be a lie, I think we can all agree that her word alone isn't exactly reliable. Kristen flinched, her head snapping toward Ron. No, she blurted out, her voice a bit shaky. Marshall is the father. Ron turned toward her, raising an eyebrow. Mrs. Campbell, you claimed the same thing about my client, and we all know how that turned out. He shrugged. Forgive me if I say we'll need more than just your assurance this time. Kristen looked down at her hands, her face pale. But let's not even get into that right now. Ron continued smoothly. Let's come back to the original question. If my client is as bad as Mrs. Campbell claims, if he is truly neglectful, heartless, and a terrible influence, why should he be involved in this child's life at all? Why is she pushing for him to take on the role of a father to a child he did not father? The judge's expression shifted, but I could see the gears turning in her mind. Ron took a step closer to the bench, his voice steady and composed. Your Honor, we have already established that Mrs. Campbell cheated on her husband, had a child with another man, and has spent this entire case painting my client as an unworthy husband and father. If that's true, then why does she want to reconcile? Why does she want a loser like him to take responsibility for a child that isn't his? The courtroom was silent, all eyes on Kristen as we waited for her answer. Kristen's sudden outburst shocked the entire courtroom. She shot up from her seat, her voice raw with desperation. He is the best husband ever, she screamed, tears streaking down her face. I love him, and I want him in my life. My child cannot have a better father than that man. The room was silent for a moment. The same woman who had betrayed me, lied to me, and humiliated me was now declaring her undying love in front of everyone. It was almost laughable. Almost. Ron, ever the professional, didn't miss a beat. He leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. Then why? He demanded. Why, Mrs. Campbell? Why did you cheat on him? Why did you break his heart? Kristen's face twisted in anguish, her whole body trembling. She tried to form words, but they came out choked and broken. Finally, through her sobs, she blurted out, I was just horny. I wanted to have sex, that's it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's expression flickered with something. Disgust, disappointment, maybe both. Kristen collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. The judge sighed and rubbed her temple before speaking. Mrs. Campbell, that will be enough. Step down. Kristen didn't move at first, as if she hadn't heard. Then, slowly, she got up and stumbled back to her seat, her body racked with quiet sobs. Court is adjourned. We will reconvene in 2 weeks, the judge announced, striking the gavel against the wooden block. 2 weeks later, I was back in the same courtroom, the same heavy wooden bench beneath me, the same dull murmur of voices filling the air. This time, though, there was no dramatic outburst, no pleading or tears, just a cold finality that settled in my chest like a stone. The judge glanced at both attorneys before turning to me. Her gaze was steady, her voice firm. Mr. Martin Campbell, do you want to reconcile with your wife? I took a deep breath, letting the question settle. I glanced at Kristen, who sat motionless beside her lawyer, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. A part of me wished I could feel something, anger, regret, even pity. But there was nothing left. No, Your Honor. My voice was steady, unwavering. The judge nodded once, then lifted her gavel. Then this court orders that the marriage is dissolved. The community assets shall be split 50-50 and distributed between the parties accordingly. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. Just like that, it was over. For me. But I was wrong. It was over for me. Not for Kristen. Moving out of the house was easier than I thought it would be. I had no attachment left to that place. It had become nothing more than walls that held memories I no longer wanted. I sold it without hesitation and moved into a smaller apartment near my office. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A fresh start, or at least the closest thing to it. My mother called me a few weeks after I settled in. She sounded hesitant, almost careful with her words. Martin, I just wanted to let you know. I'll be helping Dolores with the baby. Kristen, she's not doing well. She's been diagnosed with depression and is undergoing therapy. I leaned back against my couch, rubbing a hand over my face. A part of me felt something, sympathy, maybe, but not enough to make me forget everything she had done. I wasn't heartless, but I wasn't about to drown in guilt for her either. All right, I said simply. You're not upset? She asked cautiously. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Mom. It's fine. The baby's innocent in all this. If Dolores needs help, and you want to help her, I won't stand in the way. There was a pause before she spoke again. Have you thought about Marshall? About what he did? I exhaled slowly, already knowing where she was going with this. Mom, let's get one thing straight. It wasn't Marshall who ruined my marriage. It was Kristen. She's the one who decided to cheat. She wasn't forced into it. She made that choice on her own. I know, she admitted, but doesn't it make you angry? That man had a part in it too. Of course it does, I said, my voice calm but firm. I won't lie and say I didn't have violent thoughts about him at first. But I wasn't about to throw my life away over it. I wasn't going to get my hands dirty for a man who wasn't worth it. So you just let it go? A small smirk tugged at my lips. Not exactly. I sent the details of my divorce to his company. They didn't take too kindly to employing a man who was sleeping with a married coworker. He got fired. My mother was silent for a moment before letting out a small chuckle. All right. I suppose that's better than breaking his nose. Much cleaner too, I said with a shrug. That was the last we spoke of Marshall Jones. 3 years passed. Life moved forward, as it always does. I kept myself busy with work, slowly rebuilding my confidence, my routine, my sense of self. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. The idea of commitment, of putting my trust in someone again, felt like an impossible task. Every time I started to get close to someone, I would pull back, retreating before things got complicated. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. But I wasn't ready either. It was a quiet evening. I had just finished dinner and was considering whether to pour myself a drink when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Dolores. That was unexpected. I hesitated for a second before answering. Hello? She didn't waste any time. Martin, meet me at my house. We need to talk. Her tone was firm, leaving little room for argument. I sighed, already feeling the weight of whatever conversation was waiting for me. Dolores, I don't think. No, it's not about Kristen, she interrupted, as if she had anticipated my reluctance. This is something else. That didn't make me feel any better. I wasn't in the mood for surprises, especially not from anyone connected to my past. Dolores, I really don't see. Before I could finish, I heard another voice in the background. Martin, come and meet us, my mother said, taking the phone from Dolores. Her voice was gentle, but there was an underlying firmness to it. I'm here too. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. If it were just Dolores, I would have ignored the request, but my mother's presence changed things. All right, I muttered. I'll be there soon. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and headed out, feeling an uneasy sense of anticipation settle in my chest. The drive to Dolores's house was uneventful, but my mind kept circling around why she had called me there so suddenly. And why had my mother sounded so serious? I pulled up to the house, stepped out of the car, and knocked on the door. My mother answered first, giving me a long look before stepping aside. Inside, I spotted Dolores standing near the couch. She gave me a small nod, but before I could say anything, a small boy came running toward me, stopping just short of my legs. Who are you? He asked, tilting his head in curiosity. I smiled, crouching slightly to meet his eye level. You see that woman there? I pointed toward my mother. I'm her son. The boy nodded, his little face scrunching up as he processed that information. Oh, he said, as if it all made sense now. You are her son. Good to meet you. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and ran off again. I stood up and walked toward Dolores. She didn't waste a second before pulling me into a brief hug. Thanks for coming, she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight I couldn't quite place. I barely had time to respond before my mother handed me a glass. I looked down at the amber liquid, then back at her with a raised eyebrow. This. She met my gaze evenly. You're going to need it after we're done talking. That didn't exactly settle my nerves. I took the glass but didn't drink yet, watching as Dolores sat down and gestured for me to do the same. I sank into the chair, the unease in my stomach growing heavier by the second. She took a deep breath and spoke. Listen, your ex-wife, Kristen, she's dead. The words hit me like a slow-moving wrecking ball, not because I was grieving, but because I hadn't been prepared to hear them. My eyes locked onto Dolores's face, searching for some flicker of emotion, regret, sadness, something. But there was nothing. That was what unsettled me the most. What? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Dolores didn't flinch. An alligator took her. Last week. In Florida. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of elaboration. That was a hell of a way to go, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Before I could ask, she turned her head slightly and spoke over her shoulder. Tim, go to your room. The little boy, who had been lingering near the doorway, nodded and trotted off without question. Only when he was gone did she look back at me. Then she said it. I killed her. Fed her to a gator. My grip tightened around the glass. My breath hitched. I didn't say anything. I just emptied the glass in a single gulp, the burn of the whiskey doing little to thaw the ice creeping into my veins. My mother took the glass from my hand without a word. She refilled it. I gripped the refilled glass, staring at Dolores as her words sank in. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I wasn't sure if it was the alcohol hitting me or the sheer weight of what she had just confessed. She was in therapy, Dolores continued, her voice even, almost too calm for what she was saying. But later, I found out that she had started poisoning Tim with lies against you. I didn't like it. I warned her. She didn't listen. I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the whiskey. She was going to ruin his life, she went on. All because of her hatred toward you. She felt like you betrayed her. Can you believe that? Dolores let out a humorless laugh. You, the man she cheated on, the man she lied to over and over. And somehow, in her mind, you were the villain. I set my glass down, my fingers twitching slightly. So what did you do? I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. Dolores tilted her head slightly, as if considering how much she should say. But then she simply said, I couldn't stand by and watch. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, watching for my reaction, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from Dolores. I called your mother, she said, her tone turning casual, like she was telling me about a regular family gathering. And we four went for a trip to Florida. Only 3 of us returned. I exhaled sharply, feeling my chest tighten. The cops found her body, she continued. Well, part of it. Just her hand. The room felt colder. I actually stood there and watched while the gator feasted on her. Dolores's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, or maybe it was just satisfaction. The gator that took her hasn't been found yet. I felt my stomach lurch. Before I could respond, my mother spoke up, her voice soft but firm. You don't need so many details. I turned to her, my mind still reeling from what Dolores had just said. Bottom line, my mother continued, placing a steady hand on my shoulder, Kristen is dead. I opened my mouth, but she wasn't finished. Marshall Jones is dead. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? I choked out. My mother didn't blink. We needed to ensure that no one takes Tim away from us. She spoke so calmly, as if this was all just another step in protecting family. So he had to go. I shook my head slightly, my thoughts spinning. What are you saying? Dolores leaned back into her chair, watching me. My mother's grip on my shoulder was steady, grounding. He died in a car accident, she said simply. Drove off a bridge. Silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Without a word, my mother reached for the whiskey bottle and refilled my glass. For the 3rd time, I sat there, gripping the glass in my hand. The room felt smaller, the air pressing down on me. My mother's voice broke the silence. Now, here's the thing. Martin, she began, her tone softer than before, almost pleading. That child is innocent. I swallowed hard, staring at the liquid in my glass, but saying nothing. We're both old, she continued. We won't live long enough to raise him. Dolores leaned forward, her eyes locked onto mine. That child needs a father. I finally looked up, my gaze flicking between the 2 women. There was something unnerving about their composure, about how they had just confessed to 2 murders and were now talking about childcare like it was an everyday matter. And a mother, Dolores added. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the conversation crushing me. So we want you to adopt him, my mother said. We know he's not your son, but the people who cheated on you are both dead. If that helps. If that helps. My stomach twisted. Nothing about this helped. Dolores reached for something beside her and handed me a file. I hesitated before taking it. I've transferred all my assets to you, she said. I stared at the folder in my hands. It felt heavier than paper should. Raise this child as your own, she continued. Get married, have more kids. But please, give this child a future. A home. I blinked at her, my mind a swirling mess of emotions I couldn't untangle. Then my mother spoke again, her voice quieter now. We both have stage 4 blood cancer. My head snapped up. We won't live to see his 4th birthday, she said, her expression unreadable. A strange numbness crept over me. I wanted to feel something, Anger, grief, disbelief, but all I felt was exhaustion. Please, Martin, my mother said. I'm not trying to pin this on you. If you decide against it, I'll understand. But I know you are the best and only chance that child has in his life. The room was silent again. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't look at them. I walked out of the house, my footsteps heavy, my thoughts heavier. I got into my car, drove straight home, and collapsed onto my bed. And then I slept. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that wasn't from the whiskey. It was from everything that had been said the night before. I barely remembered driving home. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let that kid grow up alone. I found myself outside Dolores' house before I even realized I had made the decision. I knocked, and when she opened the door, there was no surprise on her face. She just stepped aside, letting me in. Tim sat on the floor, playing with a few toy cars. He looked up as I entered, his small face bright with recognition. "You're Grandma Linda's son," he said matter-of-factly. "I know you." I crouched down to his level and met his gaze. "Yep, I am. And you know what else?" He shook his head, curious. "You're my son now." He blinked, as if processing it. Then, with the simplicity only a child could have, he nodded. Okay, that was it. That was the moment. A week later, the paperwork was finalized. Tim was officially my son. My mother, never one to waste time, somehow arranged a date for me with a woman named Kelly. I protested at first, but she wouldn't hear it. "She's a good woman," Martin, my mother insisted. "A former Marine. Lost her husband in Afghanistan. No kids. You should meet her." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Mom, I just adopted a kid. I'm not exactly looking to date right now. Just one date," she said, giving me that look that meant there was no point in arguing. So I met Kelly. And somehow, one date turned into two, then into four, then into something serious. She understood me in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't push, she didn't pry. She just fit. 6 months later, we got married. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. My mother looked proud, and Dolores, despite her frail health, smiled like she had seen her plan come to life. But life has a way of reminding you that happiness is never guaranteed. My mother passed away 2 months after my wedding. Dolores followed soon after. I barely had time to process it all before Kelly told me she was pregnant. Life was moving fast, but for the first time in years, it felt like it was moving in the right direction. I had a wife, a son, a child on the way. Then, one afternoon, I found myself back at my mother's house, sorting through her things. That's when I saw it. A small, worn-out diary sitting on her nightstand. I picked it up, flipping through the pages. A picture slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up and turned it over. It was old, slightly faded, showing 2 familiar faces, my mother and Dolores, standing side by side, both wearing serious expressions. The date on the back said 1999. The location, George Bush Center for Intelligence. I sat there, staring at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. Damn, my mom was in the CIA. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.